Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of the statement and for the meetings that we've had in recent days. Mr. Speaker, the government's approach to Brexit has now become a national embarrassment. After 2 years of failure, broken promises after broken promises, the Prime Minister finally accepted the inevitable last week and voted to extend Article 50 and went to Brussels to negotiate. Last week's summit represented another negotiating failure for the Prime Minister. Her proposals were rejected and new terms were imposed on her. We now have an extension until mid-April or May the 22nd. And despite the clearly expressed will of this House, we will still face the prospect of a disastrous no-deal Brexit. This is even more remarkable given that the Minister for the Cabinet Office told this very chamber, and I quote, "Seeking such a short and critically one-off extension would be, in his words, downright reckless." Mr. Speaker, this failure has been compounded by the Prime Minister's attempts last week to pin the blame for this debacle on others. It was wholly inappropriate last Wednesday for the Prime Minister to try and pit the people against MPs. MPs elected here doing their duty to hold the government of the day to account. That is what Parliament exists for. And in a climate of heightened emotions where MPs on all sides have received threats and intimidation, I hope the Prime Minister will further reflect and think again about making what I believe to be such dangerous and irresponsible statements. Every step of the way along this process, the government has refused to reach out, refused to listen and refused to find a consensus that can represent the views of the whole country, not just the Conservative Party. Large parts of our country continue to be ignored by this government. No wonder so many people felt compelled to march on the streets or sign petitions over the weekend. Even the most ardent of Leavers, Mr. Speaker, the most ardent of Leavers think this government has failed. It's easy to understand the frustration at this chaos. It exists in this House, in Brussels and across the country. The government has no plan. For them, it's all about putting the Conservative Party before the country. Given that the Prime Minister admitted she does not have the numbers for her deal, will she accept today that her deal is dead and that the House should not have its time wasted giving the same answer for a third time? But the Prime Minister has succeeded in unifying two sides against her deal. The CBI and the TUC's unprecedented joint statement last week demanded a Plan B which protects jobs, workers, industry and communities. Has the Prime Minister got a Plan B? No. The government has failed and let the people down, whether they voted leave or whether they voted remain. The country cannot continue to afford a Tory crisis. It's time, Mr. Speaker, for Parliament to take control. And that's why, later today, we will be backing the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset. You made it clear last week, Mr. Speaker, that for the Prime Minister to bring a deal back, there must be significant changes. There are none. Rather than trying to engineer a way to bring back the same twice-rejected deal, will the Prime Minister instead allow, rather than fight plans for indicative votes? She cannot both accept her deal does not have the numbers and stand in the way of finding an alternative that may have the numbers. It is ridiculous to suggest that Parliament taking control is overturning democratic institutions. It's not, Mr. Speaker. It's Parliament doing its democratic job of holding government to account. So, Mr. Speaker, will she agree to abide by the outcome of these indicative votes if they take place on Wednesday? On behalf of the Labour Party, we will continue with cross-party discussions to find a way forward, and I thank those members who have met with colleagues of mine and myself to have these discussions. I believe there is support in this House for a deal based on an alternative that protects jobs, the economy through a customs union and full single market access, and allows us to continue the benefit from participation in vital agencies and security measures. If the government refuses to accept this, we will support measures for a public vote to stop a no-deal or chaotic Tory deal. The government has had over 2 years to find a solution and has failed. It's time, Mr. Speaker, we put an end to this and move on from the chaos and failure and begin to clean up the mess. It's time for Parliament to work together and agree on a plan B. If she's brave, the Prime Minister would help facilitate for this. If not, Parliament must send a clear message in the coming days. Mr. Speaker, I hope where the government has failed, this House can and will succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the right honourable gentleman indicates that we still face the he said we still face the prospect of no deal. The House has rejected no deal. As I said earlier, the House has rejected it. It's rejected, I think, twice now, and could very well continue to reject it. But the only way of actually putting that into practice is to support a deal. Now, he talks about reaching out. I have reached out to party leaders across this House and to other members of this House. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, have both held a number of meetings with members across this House and with party leaders. But the right honourable gentleman ended by saying that it is now time for the House to decide. But the point is that up till now the House has not decided. The House has had... Yet again, honourable members on the opposition benches say they haven't had a chance. The House has had many chances to put amendments down. The House has voted twice on the right honourable gentleman's plans for the future and rejected them. It has voted to reject no deal. It has also voted to reject a second referendum. He asked whether I was going to, whether the government would commit to abide by the indicative votes. I did, as the right honourable gentleman accepted, give him advance notice of my statement. I then read the statement. It did clearly say I cannot commit the government to delivering the outcome of any votes held by this House. And honourable members, well, the Shadow Foreign Secretary shouts that's not good enough. If she just thinks about this, for a moment, just thinks about this. First of all, we don't know what the options are going to be that will be tabled. Secondly, we don't know what will be selected. But there's another point. I think it is important that no one would want to support an option which contradicted the manifesto on which they stood for election to this House. And the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster obviously will be opening the debate this afternoon and will refer to the processes that are involved in the House. But the right honourable gentleman said it was important that MPs were elected here to make decisions, yes, to take responsibility and to make decisions. But the MPs elected here to this House at this time have a duty to respect the result of the referendum that took place in 2016, and attempts to stop that result of that referendum being put into place, or attempts to change that result of that referendum, are not respecting the voters and not respecting our democracy. And then finally, the right honourable gentleman mentioned the fact that a number of people had marched on the question of a second referendum. Indeed.
Order. The House is in a very agitated state, but it's at an early stage in the proceedings. Calm. The Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman referred to the fact that a march for a second referendum took place. It is, in fact, the right honourable gentleman's policy. I noticed that his deputy went on the march. I thought the right honourable gentleman normally jumped at any opportunity to go on a march, but on this occasion, he wasn't actually there. I can only assume on this occasion he was involved but not present.